The poker table gleamed under the oil lamp's glow, as Franklin Gallagher pushed his daughter toward the center of the saloon, and Faye knew her life had just shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She stood frozen in the smoke-filled room, barely breathing as the men around the table stared at her with varying degrees of shock, greed, and disgust. Her father's hands shook as he gestured wildly, his face flushed red from whiskey and desperation. "She's worth more than money," Franklin slurred, his words tumbling over each other. "My Faye can cook clean, so she's 19 years old and never been touched. That's gotta be worth $50,000 at least." The year was 1876, and Hamilton, Montana had seen its share of desperate men, but this crossed every line. Faye felt bile rise in her throat as she looked at her father, this man who had raised her alone after her mother died of fever 10 years ago. He had been a good father once before the drink and the cards took hold of him. "Franklin, you cannot be serious," said Marshal Davies from his corner table, standing up with his hand near his gun. "This is your daughter." "Stay out of this, Marshal," snarled Silas Trent, the mine owner who currently held most of Franklin's markers. His beady eyes raked over Faye, making her skin crawl. "The debt is real. $20,000, and Franklin here has nothing left to pay with except the girl." Faye found her voice, though it came out smaller than she wanted. "Papa, please, we can find another way. I can work, take in washing, anything." Franklin would not meet her eyes. "There is no other way, girl. Trent owns the deed to our house, our land, everything. At least this way you will have a roof over your head." "As his property," the marshal said, his voice hard with anger. "This is not legal." "It is if she agrees to marry me," Trent said, his thin lips curling into something that might have been a smile. "Then it is just a business arrangement. The debt gets forgiven and I get myself a young wife." The room spun around Faye. Marriage to Silas Trent, a man of 53 who had buried 3 wives already, each younger than the last. Rumors swirled about how those women had died, whispers of cruelty behind closed doors that nobody could prove. "I will not," Faye said, her voice stronger now. "I will not marry you." Trent's expression darkened. "Then your father goes to prison for his debts, and I take everything anyway. You will be homeless and alone, girl. At least as my wife, you will be fed and clothed." The saloon doors swung open with a crash that made everyone turn. A man ducked through the doorway, and Faye's breath caught at the sheer size of him. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly filled the frame. His dark hair hung past his collar, wild and untamed, and his face was weathered from years in the mountain sun. But it was his eyes that struck her, a clear gray that took in the scene with sharp intelligence. "Isaiah Norton," the marshal said, relief evident in his voice. "Good timing." The mountain man's gaze moved from the marshal to Franklin, then to Trent, and finally settled on Faye. Something passed across his face, too quick for her to read. "What is happening here?" Isaiah's voice was deep and rough, like rock scraping against rock. "None of your concern, Norton," Trent snapped. "Go back to your furs and pelts." Isaiah ignored him, looking instead at the marshal. "Davies," the marshal quickly explained the situation, his words clipped with anger. As he spoke, Isaiah's jaw tightened and Faye saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. Those hands were massive, scarred from hard work and harder living. "That is not legal," Isaiah said when the marshal finished. "That is what I said," Davies replied. "But Trent is claiming it is a marriage arrangement, not ownership." Isaiah looked at Faye again, really looked at her, and she felt something shift in the air between them. "Miss, do you want to marry this man?" "No," Faye said firmly. "I do not." "Then she does not have to," Isaiah said, turning to Trent. "Debt or no debt." Trent stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. You have no say in this, Norton. This is between me and Franklin. Wrong, Isaiah said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. You are trying to force a woman into marriage against her will. That gives me plenty of say. And what exactly are you going to do about it? Trent's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. In a movement almost too fast to follow, Isaiah crossed the room and grabbed Trent's wrist, holding it away from the weapon. The mine owner gasped in pain as those powerful fingers squeezed. Nothing foolish, Trent, Isaiah said. I am offering an alternative. I will buy Franklin's debt from you. All $20,000. The saloon went silent. $20,000 was a fortune, more than most men in Hamilton would see in a lifetime. Faye stared at the mountain man in shock. You do not have that kind of money, Trent said, but doubt crept into his voice. I do, Isaiah replied. 10 years of trapping, hunting, and guiding folks through the mountains. I have been saving it. He released Trent's wrist and pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat. Here is $1,000 in gold as a down payment. The rest is in the bank in Butte. We can ride there tomorrow and settle this proper. Trent rubbed his wrist, his face twisted with fury. But greed won out over pride, as it often did with men like him. If the money is real, we have a deal. It is real, Isaiah said. He turned to Franklin, and his expression held nothing but contempt. You will sign over the debt to me, and then you will leave this town. I do not care where you go, but you will not speak to your daughter again. Understood? Franklin nodded weakly, still unable to meet anyone's eyes. No, Faye said, and everyone looked at her. Papa, whatever else you have done, you are still my father. If you want to stay in Hamilton, you should be allowed to stay. Isaiah's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. That is generous, miss, more generous than he deserves. But the choice is yours. I will go, Franklin said hoarsely. She is right to want nothing to do with me. I have a brother in California. I should have gone there years ago before the drink got so bad. He finally looked at Faye, and tears streamed down his weathered face. I am sorry, Faye. Your mother would be ashamed of what I have become. Faye felt her own tears coming but held them back. Get help, Papa, please. Stop drinking and get your life back. He nodded and shuffled out of the saloon like a broken man, which Faye supposed he was. Trent gathered the gold coins from Isaiah's pouch, counting them twice before stuffing them into his jacket. I will meet you at the Butte Bank tomorrow at noon. If the money is not there, the original deal stands. It will be there, Isaiah said. After Trent left with his men, the saloon slowly returned to normal, though conversations remained hushed. Isaiah gestured for Faye to sit at a corner table, away from the curious stares. The marshal joined them, ordering coffee for all three. That was an incredibly brave thing you did, Davies said to Isaiah. But $20,000, Isaiah, that is your entire life savings. Cannot think of a better use for it, Isaiah replied. His eyes met Faye's across the table. Miss Gallagher, I want to be clear about something. I did not buy you. I bought your father's debt, which I am going to tear up as soon as the transaction is complete. You do not owe me anything. You are free. Faye's mind reeled. I do not understand. Why would you do this for a stranger? Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, his rough fingers wrapped around his coffee cup. 10 years ago, I came down from the mountains to find my sister in a similar situation. Different town, different circumstances, but the same result. A man who thought he owned her because of debts and contracts. I was too late. She killed herself rather than submit. His voice remained steady, but Faye heard the old pain beneath it. I swore that day that if I ever had the chance to help someone in that situation, I would. So that is what I am doing. The simple honesty in his words moved Faye more than any flowery speech could have. I am so sorry about your sister, and I am grateful, more than I can express. But $20,000 is too much. There must be something I can do to help repay you." "There is not," Isaiah said firmly. "And I do not want you thinking of it as a debt. It is a gift freely given." "But where will I go?" Faye asked, the reality of her situation suddenly crashing down on her. "Papa was telling the truth about one thing. Trent owns our house. I have nowhere to live." The marshal cleared his throat. "Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house and always needs help. I am sure she would give you a room in exchange for work until you get on your feet." "Or," Isaiah said slowly, and both Faye and the marshal looked at him, "you could come up to my cabin for a while. Just until you figure out what you want to do. I have plenty of space and I promise you would be safe. There is a separate sleeping room you could have, and the door has a good lock." "Isaiah," the marshal said carefully, "you know how people will talk." "Let them talk," Isaiah said, his eyes still on Faye. "But the decision is entirely yours, Miss Gallagher. If you would rather stay in town, I understand completely." Faye considered her options. Mrs. Henderson was kind enough, but her boarding house was full of gossiping women who would make Faye's life miserable with their questions and judgments. And the truth was, after what had just happened, Faye wanted nothing more than to leave Hamilton and everyone who had witnessed her humiliation. "How far is your cabin?" she asked. "About 15 miles into the mountains," Isaiah replied. "It is isolated, but the view is beautiful and the nearest neighbor is 3 miles away." "And you are certain you have space? I do not want to impose." "I am certain. The cabin is bigger than I need. I built it large thinking I might have a family someday, but that never happened, so there is plenty of room." Faye made her decision. "Then I would like to come with you at least for a little while, if the offer is genuine." "It is," Isaiah said, and something warm flickered in his gray eyes. "We can leave the day after tomorrow, after I settle things with Trent." The marshal still looked uncertain. "Faye, are you sure about this? You do not know Isaiah well." "I know he just spent his life savings to save me from a terrible fate," Faye replied. "That tells me more about his character than years of acquaintance might, and he is offering me a choice, which is more than anyone else has done today." Isaiah stood, his height even more impressive close up. "Get whatever belongings you have from your house tonight. I will meet you here tomorrow morning, and we will ride to Butte together. You should come too, Marshal, as a witness." "Agreed," Davies said. "And Isaiah, thank you. I did not know how that situation was going to end, but I am glad you walked through that door when you did." Isaiah just nodded and headed for the door. Before he left, he turned back to Faye. "It is going to be all right, Miss Gallagher. I give you my word." Then he was gone, leaving Faye sitting in the saloon with a cup of cooling coffee and a future that had completely transformed in the span of an hour. That night, Faye packed her meager belongings into 2 carpet bags. She did not own much, just some clothes, her mother's jewelry box, a few books, and the quilt her grandmother had made. As she moved through the small house she had lived in her entire life, memories assaulted her from every corner. Her mother humming while she cooked dinner. Her father teaching her to read at that very table before the drinking started. Happy times that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. She slept fitfully on the sofa, not wanting to spend another night in her bed. When dawn broke, she was already awake and waiting. Isaiah arrived with the sunrise, riding a huge buckskin horse and leading a pretty chestnut mare. He dismounted and took Faye's bags, securing them to the pack horse with efficient movements. "This is Willow," he said, gesturing to the mare. "She is gentle and sure-footed. You can ride her to Butte." "Thank you," Faye said, running her hand down the horse's soft nose. "She is beautiful." "She is reliable," Isaiah replied, which seemed to be higher praise coming from him. The marshal met them at the edge of town, and the three of them rode north toward Butte. The journey took most of the day, but Faye did not mind. The Montana landscape spread out around them in breathtaking beauty, mountains rising in the distance with peaks still capped in snow despite it being June. Isaiah proved to be a quiet companion, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and kind. He pointed out landmarks, told her the names of the various plants and animals they passed, and made sure they stopped regularly so Faye could rest. By the time they reached Butte, the sun hung low in the sky, painting everything gold. The mining town bustled with activity, even at this hour, and Faye felt overwhelmed by the noise and crowds after quiet Hamilton. Isaiah led them directly to the bank, where a tired-looking clerk informed them that Mr. Trent had already arrived and was waiting in the manager's office. Inside, they found not only Trent but also a lawyer who had drawn up the paperwork for the transfer of debt. Isaiah's bank account proved to be even more substantial than he had claimed. The manager, who clearly knew him well, processed the withdrawal of $20,000 with the care such a sum deserved. Trent watched the money being counted with hungry eyes, while Isaiah's expression remained impassive. When the transaction was complete, Isaiah took the papers that outlined Franklin Gallagher's debt and right there in front of everyone tore them into pieces. "What are you doing?" Trent sputtered. "Those are worth $20,000. Were worth," Isaiah corrected. "Now they are worthless because the debt is forgiven. Miss Gallagher owes no one anything." Trent's face purpled with rage. "You are a fool, Norton. You just threw away a fortune." "No," Isaiah said calmly. "I spent it on something important. There is a difference." The marshal documented everything, ensuring there could be no question later about the legitimacy of the transaction. By the time they left the bank, full darkness had fallen, and Isaiah suggested they stay at a hotel for the night before starting back to Hamilton in the morning. He secured 2 rooms, one for Faye and one for himself and the marshal, and they all met for dinner in the hotel restaurant. Over roasted chicken and potatoes, the marshal asked Isaiah about his plans. "I will stay near Hamilton for another week or so, making sure Trent does not try anything else," Isaiah said. "Then Miss Gallagher and I will head up to the cabin." "Please," Faye said quietly. "Call me Faye. After everything, I think we can dispense with formalities." Isaiah's stern face softened slightly. "All right, Faye, and you can call me Isaiah." "Isaiah," she repeated, liking the feel of his name in her mouth. "What is your cabin like?" he thought for a moment, as if trying to put something into words that he rarely discussed. "It is solid. Made from timber I cut and shaped myself. 2 rooms downstairs, 2 rooms upstairs, a good fireplace, a sound roof. The water comes from a spring about 50 yards away, cold and clean. There is a garden plot where I grow vegetables in the summer and a smokehouse for preserving meat. It is simple but comfortable." "It sounds wonderful," Faye said and meant it. After the cramped, debt-ridden house in Hamilton, the idea of a clean, honest cabin in the mountains appealed to her deeply. "It can be lonely," Isaiah admitted. "I go weeks sometimes without seeing another person. That is why I come down to Hamilton every month or so to trade furs and remember how to talk to people." He smiled slightly. "I am not always successful at the second part." "You are doing fine," Faye assured him. "Better than fine. You are kind and honest, and those qualities matter more than being a smooth talker." The marshal raised his coffee cup. "Here is to honest men and second chances." They all drank to that. The next morning they rode back to Hamilton, arriving in the late afternoon. Word of what had happened had spread through the town, and Faye felt eyes on her as they passed through the streets. Some looks held pity, others judgment, and a few held admiration. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, refusing to be ashamed of something that was not her fault. Isaiah helped her move her belongings into the hotel, where she would stay for the next few days while he finished his business in town. He proved good to his word about checking on Trent, making himself visible around Hamilton, and ensuring the mine owner knew Faye was under Isaiah's protection. During those days, Faye found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet mountain man. He was unlike anyone she had ever known. Where most men talked too much and said too little, Isaiah's words were carefully chosen and meaningful. He treated her with a respect she had rarely experienced, asking her opinions and actually listening to her answers. She learned that he was 29 years old, originally from Wyoming, and had been living in the Montana mountains for a decade. His sister's name had been Margaret, and she had been just 17 when she died. Isaiah did not talk much about his parents, but Faye gathered there had been some kind of falling out years ago. In turn, she told him about her life in Hamilton, about her mother's death and her father's slow decline into drinking and gambling. She spoke of her dreams of maybe becoming a teacher someday, of wanting to see more of the world than just one small Montana town. "You could still do that," Isaiah said one evening as they sat on the hotel porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "Become a teacher, I mean. There are schools that need teachers all over the territory." "I do not have enough education myself," Faye replied. "I can read and write and do figures, but that is not enough to teach others." "It is more than a lot of folks have," Isaiah pointed out, "and you could keep learning. I have books at the cabin, not many but some good ones. You are welcome to them." The thought of having time to read, to learn, to simply exist without the weight of her father's debts and drinking hanging over her, seemed almost too good to be true. On the 5th day, Isaiah announced that he had finished his business in town and they could leave for the cabin whenever Faye was ready. She discovered she was eager to go, to leave Hamilton and all its painful memories behind. They departed at dawn the next morning, their horses loaded with supplies. Isaiah had purchased flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples, as well as fabric for Faye to make new clothes if she wanted. He had also bought her a warm coat and sturdy boots, anticipating the mountain weather. The trail led steadily upward, following a creek through pine forests and meadows dotted with wildflowers. Isaiah pointed out deer in the distance, and once they saw a black bear ambling through the trees. Faye's heart pounded with fear, but Isaiah calmly assured her the bear would leave them alone if they left it alone. "You get used to being around them," he said. "They are more interested in berries and grubs than in people." As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner and cooler, and Faye was grateful for the coat Isaiah had bought. The views became increasingly spectacular, with valleys stretching out below them and peaks soaring above. It was late afternoon when they finally reached Isaiah's cabin, and Faye caught her breath at the sight of it. Built from golden logs chinked with white plaster, it sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. A covered porch wrapped around the front, and behind it she could see the smokehouse he had mentioned, as well as a small barn for the horses. "It is beautiful," Faye breathed. Isaiah looked pleased. "Come on, I will show you inside." The interior was as well crafted as the exterior. The main room held a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table with chairs, and several comfortable-looking pieces of furniture. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books, tools, and various odds and ends. A ladder led up to a loft, and 2 doors open off the main room. "That is my room," Isaiah said, pointing to one door, "and this one is yours." He opened the other door to reveal a small but cozy room with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. True to his word, there was a lock on the inside of the door. "It is perfect," Faye said, setting down her bags. "Thank you, Isaiah, for everything." He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You do not need to keep thanking me. Just make yourself at home here. The cabin is as much yours as mine for as long as you want to stay." Over the next few weeks, Faye settled into a new rhythm of life. She woke with the sun, helped Isaiah with the chores, and spent her afternoons reading, sewing, or exploring the area around the cabin. Isaiah taught her how to fish in the creek, how to identify edible plants, and how to watch for signs of weather changes in the mountains. They fell into an easy companionship, working together during the day and talking by the fire at night. Faye learned that Isaiah was well-read and thoughtful, with strong opinions about politics, philosophy, and the future of the Western Territories. He listened to her ideas with genuine interest and never dismissed her thoughts simply because she was a woman. She found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the way his muscles moved under his shirt as he chopped wood or carried water from the spring. He was powerfully built, with broad shoulders and strong arms that could lift things that would take two normal men. But despite his size and strength, he was gentle in his movements, careful not to use more force than necessary. One evening, about a month after they had arrived at the cabin, Faye was preparing dinner when Isaiah came in from checking his trap lines. He looked troubled, and when she asked what was wrong, he hesitated before answering. "Saw signs of men on the northern ridge," he said. "Could be nothing, just hunters passing through, but something about the tracks did not feel right." "What do you mean?" Faye asked, worry creeping into her voice. They were moving in a pattern, like they were searching for something rather than just traveling through, and they tried to hide their tracks, which honest men do not usually do. "You think it could be Trent?" Isaiah's jaw tightened. "I would not put it past him. He was not happy about losing $20,000 and a young wife in one day. But surely he would not come all the way up here. Men like Trent do not like to lose," Isaiah said, "and they especially do not like being made to look foolish." "I made him look foolish in front of half of Hamilton." Fear clutched at Faye's heart. "What should we do?" "Be cautious," Isaiah said. He went to a cabinet and pulled out a rifle, checking to ensure it was loaded. "I am probably being overly careful. Like I said, it could just be hunters. But I want you to keep this rifle near you when I am not in the cabin. Do you know how to shoot?" "Papa taught me when I was young," Faye said, "but I have not fired a gun in years." "Tomorrow I will take you out and let you practice," Isaiah said, "just to be safe." That night, Faye lay awake in her room, listening to the sounds of the forest outside her window. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made her heart race. She told herself she was being foolish, that Isaiah was probably right about it being just hunters. But deep down, she could not shake the feeling that their peaceful time in the mountains was about to come to an end. The next morning, Isaiah was true to his word. After breakfast, he took Faye out to a clearing and set up targets using old cans and pieces of wood. The rifle was heavy in her hands, but once she fired the first shot, muscle memory came back. She was not an expert marksman, but after an hour of practice, she could reliably hit the targets. "Good," Isaiah said approvingly. "That is good enough. Remember, if you have to use it, aim for center mass. Do not try for fancy shots." "Isaiah, you are scaring me," Faye admitted. He set down his own rifle and turned to face her fully. "I am sorry. That is not my intention. The truth is, you are probably safer up here than you would be anywhere else. But I have learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts are telling me to be prepared. What if it is Trent? What if he tries to hurt you?" Something flickered in Isaiah's eyes, an emotion Faye could not quite name. "He would have to get past me to get to you, and I promise you, Faye, that is not going to happen." The intensity in his voice made her shiver, but not from fear. She realized suddenly that she trusted this man completely, trusted him in a way she had never trusted anyone, not even her father. "I know," she said softly. "I feel safe with you." They stood there in the clearing, the morning sun filtering through the pines, and something shifted between them. Isaiah reached out slowly, giving Faye plenty of time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His rough fingers lingered on her cheek for just a moment before he dropped his hand. "We should get back," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I want to reinforce some of the shutters on the cabin." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Isaiah worked on the cabin's defenses while Faye prepared supplies in case they needed to leave quickly. She filled water skins, packed food that would travel well, and made sure their horses were ready to be saddled at a moment's notice. As the sun set, Isaiah barred the door and closed the shutters, something he had not done since Faye arrived. They ate dinner in near silence, both lost in their own thoughts. "Isaiah," Faye said as they finished their meal, "thank you for protecting me. I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. You have given me more than just safety. You have given me hope for a future I thought I had lost." He looked at her across the table, firelight dancing in his gray eyes. "You deserve that future, Faye. You deserve every good thing." "So do you," she replied. "You have been alone up here for so long. Do you ever get lonely?" "I used to," he admitted. "But not so much anymore. Not since you came." The air between them felt charged, full of words neither of them quite dared to speak. Faye's heart pounded as she realized she was falling in love with this quiet, strong man who had saved her and asked nothing in return. Before she could find the courage to say something, a sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, trying and failing to be quiet as they approached the cabin. Isaiah was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. He motioned for Faye to get behind the table, which he had positioned earlier to provide cover if needed. She grabbed her own rifle with shaking hands. "Isaiah Norton," a voice called from outside. It was not Trent, but it was someone familiar. Faye recognized it as belonging to one of Trent's men. "Come on out, we just want to talk." "Nothing to talk about," Isaiah called back. "Turn around and go home before someone gets hurt." "Cannot do that," the voice replied. "Mr. Trent sent us to collect what is rightfully his." "The debt is paid," Isaiah said. "Faye owes him nothing." "That is where you are wrong, mountain man. See, we did some asking around." Turns out that debt transfer was not exactly legal since Franklin Gallagher was drunk when he agreed to it. Mr. Trent's lawyer says the original agreement still stands. Faye's blood ran cold. Could that be true? "Even if that were true, which I doubt," Isaiah called, "Faye never agreed to anything. You cannot force her into marriage." "Who said anything about marriage?" The man laughed. "Mr. Trent is done trying to make this respectable. He figures if he cannot have her willing, he will just take her. Once she is used up, nobody else will want her anyway." Rage such as Faye had never seen transformed Isaiah's face. "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged," the man said, and then gunfire erupted. Isaiah pulled Faye down as bullets thudded into the cabin's thick walls. He returned fire through a gap in the shutters, his movements calm and controlled despite the chaos. Faye raised her own rifle, trying to spot targets in the growing darkness. "How many?" she asked. "At least 5, Isaiah replied. "Maybe more." The gunfight lasted for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Isaiah was a skilled shot, and Faye heard at least 2 men cry out after his bullets found their marks. But they were outnumbered, and both of them knew it. During a lull in the shooting, Isaiah grabbed Faye's arm. "We need to leave. I know these mountains better than they do. If we can get to the horses, we can lose them in the dark." "But the cabin," Faye protested. "I can rebuild a cabin," Isaiah said fiercely. "I cannot replace you." They gathered their pre-packed supplies and made their way to the back door. Isaiah eased it open, checking for threats, then motioned for Faye to follow. They sprinted across the clearing toward the barn, bullets kicking up dirt around them. One of Trent's men stepped out from behind the barn, gun raised, but Isaiah was faster. His fist connected with the man's jaw, and the man dropped like a stone. They burst into the barn and began saddling the horses with frantic speed. Just as they were finishing, 3 more men appeared in the barn doorway. The leader was a tall, scarred man Faye recognized as Trent's foreman. "End of the line," he said, raising his gun. Isaiah pushed Faye behind him, his body a shield between her and the weapon. But before anyone could fire, a new voice rang out from behind Trent's men. "Drop your weapons. Now." Marshal Davies stepped into view, flanked by 4 deputized men from Hamilton. Relief flooded through Faye as Trent's men, realizing they were outgunned, slowly lowered their guns. "How did you know?" Isaiah asked as the marshal's men began tying up Trent's crew. "Got a telegraph from the sheriff in Butt," Davies replied. "Seems Trent's lawyer was not as careful as he thought. Someone overheard him talking about sending men up here to take Faye by force. The sheriff contacted me and I gathered some good men and rode hard to get here." He looked at the captured men with disgust. "You boys are going to jail for a long time. Attempted kidnapping, attempted murder, and I am sure I can think of a few other charges." "What about Trent?" Faye asked. "Already arrested," Davies said with satisfaction. "He will stand trial for this, and the testimony of these men will seal his fate. You are safe, Faye. Truly safe this time." The marshal and his men took the prisoners back toward Hamilton, promising to send someone back to check on Isaiah and Faye in a few days. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, Faye found herself alone with Isaiah in the barn, the adrenaline slowly draining from her body. She started to shake, the terror of what had almost happened finally catching up to her. Isaiah immediately wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his broad chest. She buried her face in his shirt and cried, all the fear and stress of the past months pouring out of her. "It is over," Isaiah murmured into her hair. "You are safe. I have got you." When the tears finally subsided, Faye pulled back to look up at him. His face was smudged with gunpowder, and there was a cut on his cheek she had not noticed before. Without thinking, she reached up to gently touch it. "You are hurt." "It is nothing," he said, but he did not move away from her touch. "Isaiah," she said softly, "when that man appeared in the barn door, all I could think was that I did not want to die without telling you something." His arms tightened around her. "What?" "That I love you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know it is probably too soon, and I know you did not ask for this, but it is the truth. I love you. You saved me, but more than that, you showed me what a good man looks like. You made me feel valued and safe and free. I love you." For a moment, Isaiah just stared at her, and Faye's heart sank, thinking she had made a terrible mistake. But then he smiled, a real, full smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Thank God," he said. "I have been falling in love with you since the moment you stood up to your father in that saloon. You were terrified, but you were brave. And every day since, you have proven how strong and smart and wonderful you are. I love you too, Faye. I love you so much." He kissed her then, and Faye felt like her heart might burst with joy. His lips were gentle despite the roughness of his beard, and she melted into him, into this feeling of being cherished and wanted and loved. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly and marry you if you will have me, not because of debts or obligations, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Yes," Faye said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes to all of it." They spent that night in the barn, not wanting to return to the bullet-ridden cabin in the dark. Isaiah made a comfortable nest in the hay and held Faye close, both of them talking late into the night about their hopes and dreams for the future. The next morning, they assessed the damage to the cabin. It was significant, with several windows broken and bullet holes throughout the walls, but the structure was sound. Isaiah assured Faye they could repair it together. Together, Faye repeated, loving the sound of that word. I like that. Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side to restore the cabin. The marshal returned with news that Trent had been sentenced to 10 years in prison for conspiracy to commit kidnapping and attempted murder. His assets, including the deed to Faye's old house in Hamilton, had been seized to pay his victims. The house is yours again if you want it, Davies told Faye. Or you could sell it. Either way, you have options now. Faye looked at Isaiah, who was replacing one of the broken windows. I will sell it, she decided. I do not need it anymore. This is my home now. The marshal smiled knowingly. I figured as much. Congratulations, by the way. The whole town is talking about how the mountain man and Franklin's daughter fell in love. It is a better ending than anyone expected. After the cabin was repaired, Isaiah took Faye down to Hamilton, where he bought her a ring, a simple band of gold with a small diamond, and they were married in the small church on the edge of town. The marshal stood as witness, along with Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, and a handful of other townspeople who had come to care about Faye. That night, back at their cabin in the mountains, Isaiah carried Faye over the threshold. She laughed at the old tradition, but her breath caught as he set her down and looked at her with such love and desire that she felt it all the way to her soul. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. "No," she replied truthfully. "Not with you, never with you." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and led her to their room. He had moved his things into the larger bedroom so they could share it, and Faye saw that he had filled it with wildflowers, their colors bright in the lamplight. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, Isaiah patient as he showed Faye pleasures she had never imagined. He was gentle with his strength, his powerful body moving with hers in a rhythm as old as time. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, and Faye felt a completeness she had never known existed. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured against his chest. "Neither did I," Isaiah admitted. "I thought I would spend my life alone in these mountains." But you changed everything. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Faye's life. She and Isaiah settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked together on the cabin and the land, and Isaiah began teaching Faye everything he knew about surviving in the mountains. She proved to be an excellent student, quickly learning to track animals, identify weather patterns, and find her way through the dense forests. As autumn turned the leaves gold and red, Faye realized she had missed her monthly time. At first, she thought it was just stress from everything that had happened, but when a second month passed, she knew. She told Isaiah one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. His face lit up with joy, and he pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Faye asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Isaiah replied. "You have given me everything, Faye. A home, a family, a reason to come down from the mountain. You have given me a life." "You gave me freedom," Faye said. "Real freedom, the kind that lets me choose my own path, and I choose you every single day." As winter settled over the mountains, Isaiah made preparations for their child's arrival. He built a cradle from smooth pine wood, and Faye sewed blankets and tiny clothes. The nearest doctor was in Hamilton, too far to reach easily in winter, So they made arrangements with a midwife who lived closer to come when Faye's time arrived. The baby came in early spring, when the first wildflowers were pushing up through the melting snow. Labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Isaiah feared he might lose both Faye and the child. But Faye was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and when the baby's first cry filled the cabin, Isaiah felt tears streaming down his face. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant in Faye's arms. "A healthy, strong boy." Faye looked down at her son with wonder. He had his father's strong features and a thick shock of dark hair. When Isaiah came to sit beside them on the bed, the baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Isaiah said, his voice thick with emotion. "What should we name him?" "Thomas," Faye suggested. "After your father, if that is all right." Isaiah was quiet for a moment. His relationship with his father had been complicated, but Faye knew he had loved the man despite their differences. "Thomas Isaiah Norton," he said finally. "That is a good, strong name." Being parents transformed them both in ways they had not expected. Isaiah, who had always been protective, became even more so, constantly checking on Faye and the baby. But he was also surprisingly gentle with the infant, his large hands cradling the tiny body with infinite care. Faye found reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. The sleepless nights, the constant demands of a newborn, the worry that came with being responsible for such a fragile life, all of it might have overwhelmed her. But she had Isaiah by her side, always ready to help, always supporting her. As Thomas grew from an infant to a curious toddler, the cabin rang with his laughter. Isaiah taught him to walk by letting him hold onto one massive finger, and Faye taught him his letters using the books from Isaiah's shelves. When Thomas was 3, Faye found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she delivered a daughter in the middle of summer. They named her Rose, and she proved to be as different from her brother as night from day. Where Thomas was serious and thoughtful like his father, Rose was bright and talkative, filling the cabin with constant chatter and questions. The years passed peacefully. Isaiah's trapping business thrived, and they were able to save enough money to make improvements to the cabin. They added another room for the children, and built a proper root cellar for storing food through the long winters. Occasionally, they would travel down to Hamilton to trade and visit the marshal, who had become a dear friend. The town had changed over the years, growing larger and more civilized, but it still remembered the story of the girl whose father gambled her away, and the mountain man who won her back. On one of these visits, when Thomas was 10 and Rose was 7, they ran into an older man on the street who looked vaguely familiar. It took Faye a moment to recognize him, and when she did, her breath caught. "Papa." Franklin Gallagher looked nothing like the broken drunk who had tried to sell his daughter. He was clean-shaven and sober, his eyes clear and full of shame as he recognized Faye. "Hello, Faye," he said quietly. "I know I have got no right to speak to you, and if you want me to leave, I will. But I wanted you to know that I made it to California like I said. My brother helped me get sober, and I have been clean for 8 years now. I work as a clerk at a dry goods store, and I am trying to live a better life." Isaiah stepped closer to Faye, his protective instincts immediately engaged, but she put a hand on his arm. She looked at her father, this man who had caused her so much pain, and found that she no longer felt anger, just a distant sadness for what might have been. "I am glad you are doing better, Papa," she said. "Truly I am. These are your grandchildren, Thomas and Rose, and this is my husband, Isaiah." Franklin's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the family Faye had built. "You deserve every bit of happiness," he said. I am so sorry for what I put you through. If I could go back and change things, I would. But you cannot, Faye said gently. None of us can. All we can do is move forward and try to be better. You are doing that, and I am proud of you for it. They talked for a few more minutes, awkward but healing, before Franklin said goodbye. As he walked away, Isaiah pulled Faye close. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, Faye said, surprised to find it was true. Seeing him does not hurt the way I thought it would. That part of my life feels so far away now, like it happened to someone else. The life I have with you and the children, that is what is real. That is what matters. Isaiah kissed the top of her head. I love you, Faye Norton, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow. As they walked back to where they had left the wagon, Thomas and Rose skipping ahead of them, Faye reflected on how much her life had changed. She had gone from being a piece of property in a poker game to being a free woman, a beloved wife, and a mother to 2 wonderful children. She had gone from being trapped in a small house with a drunk father to roaming freely through the Montana mountains, with a man who treated her as an equal partner in all things. That night, as they made camp on their way back to the cabin, the children fell asleep quickly, worn out from the excitement of town. Faye and Isaiah sat by the fire, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Do you ever miss it? Isaiah asked. Town life, having neighbors close by, all of that? No, Faye said without hesitation. Our cabin is home. These mountains are home. You are home. Everything I need is right here. Even so, Isaiah said thoughtfully, the children will need more education as they get older. I have been thinking maybe we could build a small schoolhouse near the cabin, bring in a teacher from town for a few months each year. Other families in these mountains might send their children too. Faye turned to look at him, love swelling in her chest. Even after all these years, he still found ways to surprise her with his thoughtfulness. That is a wonderful idea. Or, she said slowly, I could teach them myself. I have been reading every book we own multiple times. I think I could manage basic education for mountain children. You would be an excellent teacher, Isaiah said. But are you sure you want to take that on? Between the children and the homestead, you already have plenty to do. I am sure, Faye replied. My mother always told me that education was the key to freedom. I want to give other children the chance to learn, the way you gave me the chance to be free. So when spring came again, Isaiah built a small schoolhouse about a mile from their cabin, and Faye began teaching the children of the scattered mountain families who lived in the area. At first, she had only 6 students, including Thomas and Rose. But word spread about the mountain woman who taught reading, writing, and arithmetic with patience and kindness. And within a year, she had 15 students. Isaiah supported her fully in this endeavor, handling more of the household chores and watching the younger children who were not yet old enough for school. He was proud of his wife, of the way she had taken her painful past and transformed it into something that helped others. As the years continued to pass, their family grew once more. When Faye was 35 and Isaiah 45, they had one more child, a surprise baby girl they named Margaret, after Isaiah's sister. This Margaret would have the chance at life that the first one never did, and Isaiah saw it as a kind of redemption. Thomas grew into a young man as strong and principled as his father. He learned the mountain man's trade from Isaiah, but he also had his mother's love of learning. When he was 18, he left to attend a newly opened college in Missoula, promising to return and use his education to help their community. Rose, bright and spirited, announced at 16 that she wanted to be a doctor. It was an audacious dream for a girl from the mountains, but Faye and Isaiah encouraged her. They had learned that dreams were worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for. Rose eventually left for medical school back east, writing long letters home about her studies and adventures. Young Margaret, growing up surrounded by love and stability, showed an early talent for music. Isaiah bought her a small piano during one of their trips to Hamilton, and the sound of her playing filled the cabin on long winter evenings. Through it all, Isaiah and Faye's love remained constant. They had built something beautiful together, something that had started from the ashes of desperation and trauma and grown into a life full of purpose, joy, and family. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaiah surprised Faye with a trip back to the spot where he had first kissed her, in that barn on the night they had survived Trent's attack. The barn was long gone, replaced by a meadow filled with wildflowers, but the mountains remained unchanged. "I think about that night often," Isaiah said as they stood together in the meadow. "How close I came to losing you before I even really had you." "But you did not lose me," Faye replied, threading her fingers through his. His hair had more gray in it now, and there were lines around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as the day she met him. "I am right here, and I always will be." "You have any regrets?" Isaiah asked. "About how your life turned out? You could have gone to a city, found an easier life." Faye laughed. "Easier maybe, but not better, never better. Isaiah, you set me free that night in the saloon, but I chose to give my freedom back to you. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because loving you is the freest I have ever felt." He pulled her close, and they danced in the meadow with no music but the wind through the pines and the beating of their own hearts. As they grew older, Isaiah and Faye began to think about their legacy. They legally donated the land for Faye's schoolhouse to the community, ensuring it would continue to educate mountain children long after they were gone. They also established a fund to help young people from the mountains pursue higher education, thinking of their own children and all the other bright minds that might be trapped by poverty and isolation. Thomas did return after college, bringing with him a wife and new ideas about sustainable forestry and conservation. He built his own cabin near his parents, and soon, grandchildren were running through the woods that Isaiah had first claimed decades ago. Rose also came home eventually, setting up a small medical practice that served the scattered mountain communities. She never married, declaring that her patients were family enough, but she was happy and fulfilled in a way that made her parents proud. Margaret surprised everyone by marrying a traveling musician and moving to San Francisco, where she performed in concert halls and sent back glowing letters about city life. Of all their children, she was the one who ventured farthest from home, but she visited every summer, filling the cabin with music and stories of the wider world. Isaiah lived to the age of 78, his body finally giving out after decades of hard mountain living. But he died peacefully in his own bed, with Faye holding his hand and all three of his children gathered around him. His last words were for Faye. "Thank you," he whispered. "For 29 years of happiness I never thought I would have." "Thank you," Faye replied through her tears. "For setting me free and then choosing to walk beside me. I love you, Isaiah Norton. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." He smiled at that, squeezed her hand once more, and slipped away peacefully. Faye lived for another 5 years after Isaiah's death, though the cabin felt emptier without his presence. She continued to teach when her health allowed, and she spent long hours writing down her story, wanting future generations to know about the mountain man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. She wrote about the night her father gambled her away, about the terror and despair she had felt. She wrote about Isaiah walking through the saloon doors like an answer to a prayer she had not known to pray. She wrote about learning to love, to trust, to build a life with someone who saw her as an equal and a partner. But mostly, she wrote about freedom. The freedom to choose. The freedom to love. The freedom to become whoever you wanted to be, regardless of where you started. On a bright spring morning, when the wildflowers were blooming and the mountains were painted gold by the sunrise, Faye passed away in her sleep. Her children found her with a smile on her face and her journal open to the last page, where she had written, "I was once a girl whose father gambled her away. But I became a woman who was won back by a mountain man who set me completely free. And in my freedom, I chose love. I chose him. Every single day, I chose him. And that made all the difference." They buried her next to Isaiah in a small clearing overlooking the valley, with a view of the mountains they had both loved so much. The funeral was attended by more than 200 people, mountain folk and town folk alike, all of whom had been touched by Faye and Isaiah's story. Thomas stood to speak at the service, his voice strong despite his grief. "My parents taught us that love is not about ownership or obligation. It is about choice. My father chose to save my mother, not because he wanted to possess her, but because it was the right thing to do. And my mother chose to love him, not because she owed him, but because he gave her the freedom to make that choice." They built a life based on respect, partnership, and genuine affection. That is their legacy. That is what they leave behind. In the years that followed, the story of Faye and Isaiah became something of a legend in the Montana mountains. People told it around campfires and in schoolrooms. A tale of how love could transform despair into hope, how one brave choice could change the trajectory of a life. The cabin still stood decades later, preserved by their children and grandchildren as a monument to what their ancestors had built. Visitors could see the books Faye had used to teach herself and others, the tools Isaiah had used to carve out a life in the wilderness, and the cradle that had rocked 3 generations of children. But more than the physical objects, what remained was the truth at the heart of their story. That true love is not about possession, but about setting someone free, and then being chosen every day of that person's own free will. Faye had been the girl whose father gambled her away. Isaiah had been the mountain man who won her back. But together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone. They had built a life of freedom, love, and purpose that echoed through generations. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Not over Silas Trent or Franklin Gallagher or any of the other forces that had tried to control Faye's destiny, but over the very idea that a person could be owned, traded, or gambled away like property. Isaiah had proven that a real man does not seek to possess, but to protect and cherish. Faye had proven that a woman freed from others' control could achieve remarkable things. Together, they had proven that love, real love, is the ultimate freedom. Their story ended not with fanfare or drama, but with quiet contentment. 2 lives well lived, 3 children raised with love and wisdom. A community enriched by their presence. A legacy that would inspire others for generations to come. And somewhere in the Montana mountains, where the pines whisper ancient secrets and the wildflowers bloom eternal, the spirits of a mountain man and the woman he loved walk together still, forever free, forever choosing each other, forever home.